December 21st meeting minutes. If there's no questions about that, we'll get a motion to approve them.
I'll make a motion to approve. Oh, you got it.
One, two.
I'll second then.
Yeah, good. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Meeting minutes are approved. And new member introductions.
Yeah, and we have two new members today, so I thought it might be useful for our sitting members and then our two new folks, Mark and Petra, maybe just to run through everyone really quickly. Just who you are, what you do, maybe how long you've been on BDAB if you know off the top of your head. Maybe Brenda, if you wouldn't mind going
Oh,
first.
sure. Yeah. So Brenda Spears. My company is BuzzTag. We do promotional marketing. I have lived in Bend for over 25 years. Have kids and family we've raised here. I have been on the boards of Opportunity Knox in the past, AdFed, so pretty familiar with the ins and outs of a lot of people in town. I have been on BDAB. I think this is my 6th year. So by the end of this year, I'm no longer able to attend. And I'm currently the president of the board for Ability, a nonprofit serving people with disabilities.
Right. Ryan Andrews, I've been on the board since I think middle of last year or so. I'm one of the owners of Hiatus Homes, home builder and developer here locally in Bend.
Gary North with R&H Construction. I've been on the board about the same, I think we came on about the same time, so mid last year.
Hey, everybody, Kevin Berkey, owner of Uphill Partners Management Consulting, focused on workforce and economic development. Similarly, mid last year, joined BDAB, I believe.
And then Tierney, you're the veteran BDAB member on the call there.
Hey there, my name's Tierney. I've been in Bend for about 10 years now. At first I was telecommuting and I ran Bend Tech co-working for a couple years. Right now I run a store downtown called Expedition Club and Supply, and I got 2 kids, 2 dogs, and love Central Oregon.
Petra, do you want to jump in next?
Hi, I'm Petra Oroslanova. Recent in US and also in Bend. We just moved in July last year, whole family. I have 3 kids. I'm working for Lonza as head of finance, and hopefully I can provide some international experience.
Hi there, I'm Mark Cronky. I have a company called Invoke Technologies, and we supply consulting to transportation agencies in Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Atlanta. And a lot of our focus is on equity. And so I hope to bring an equity position to the board. And I'm really looking forward to this. I've been in Bend for a little under 3 years, and I just want to get involved and help where I can. So that'll be my attitude, help where I can. Thank you.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Let's see. Visit Bend.
Yeah, and I can tee this up really quick. So this is part of our contract with Visit Bend. They provide a business plan to BDAB every May. BDAB gets to provide input on its way to council. But part of our contract as well requires a mid-year update. We didn't have a January meeting, so we're having that mid-year update here in February. You'll notice Kevin Dugan is not here. He's moved on to a different role. So Nate and their board chair, Todd Montgomery, will be giving the update today and I can't see the Zoom from my laptop due to some technical issues, but for folks that are here for public comment, we had some schedule issues. So kind of put Visit Bend first, 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll have public comment because I know there's a lot of interest in a couple of pretty big topics working their way to or through council right now. So if you're online and you want to provide public comment, we'll get to you right after this.
All right, now I'm going to try to share my screen. Slideshow. it's working. It's nice to have that so I can actually see where I'm at. Well, good, is it afternoon? Yeah, good afternoon, members of BDAB, city staff. Thanks for having us. I'm Nate Wyeth. I'm our VP of Marketing Communications at Visit Bend. I'm joined by Todd Montgomery, who's Visit Bend's board chair, professor, faculty at OSU Cascades. Did I say that right?
Yep, whatever, yep.
I know the few of you are new to the BDAB, so I'm just going to try to go through, being mindful of time, give a quick update on sort of why we're here doing this, talking to you all. Just give you a quick update on where we're at halfway through our fiscal year, and then open it up for any Q&A after that. So,
Nate, can you move that just when you guys are talking? Yeah, it has to be pretty close.
feel like Ricky Bobby with my hands. All right, so we'll jump into just who Visit Bend is, and from a very high level, we're a group of folks who all live and work here in Bend. We're really passionate about this place, and we're also passionate about caring for this community and honoring all voices and experience, no matter who where they're from, and ultimately creating this place that folks feel welcome when they come here. It's kind of our underlying philosophy there. Diving into the bigger picture of why Visit Bend exists. So at a really high level, we have a statewide or a citywide lodging tax. It's 10.4%. That tax is levied on anybody who stays in short-term lodging, hotels, motels, Airbnbs, campgrounds, even within city limits. On a monthly or quarterly basis, that revenue based on that 10.4% tax is remitted to the city. And then the city, by state law, receives about 64.6 of that. That goes into the city's unrestricted general fund. And also there's a 4% portion of that that's allocated directly to police and fire. And then the remaining 35.4% comes to Visit Bend as the contracted partner to reinvest those tourism, marketing, promotion, and tourism related facilities dollars. Another thing I want to point out is that we have two grant programs that we run and operate, the Bend Sustainability Fund and the Bend Cultural Tourism Fund. Together, those comprise about 25% of all of Visit Bend's revenue that comes in and then goes back out. Trying to be so fast. Now diving into sort of the economic impact of the tourism industry. I don't think any of you doubt the economic power of the industry, but I brought some numbers along with me today because I really wanted to help illustrate, in this graph that's up on there. It can be a little bit confusing, but the idea is that tourism and vacation spending doesn't just end at those businesses who are directly correlated to the industry, that there is a lot of revenue and money and support that's going to those folks, like professional services, so bankers, folks who are involved in construction. The impact doesn't just stop at those tourism industry related businesses who are directly correlated. It's far and beyond that. In 2022, total travel spending just in the city limits of Bend totaled about $382 million. So a significant amount of money. Direct travel related employment grew to close to 4,000 jobs. So a lot of jobs that are directly related to that. And I'll get into some numbers later around the impact and earning potential of folks who go into that industry versus others, which is pretty phenomenal. And travel related earnings grew to $105 million, which was a 20.9% increase over the prior year. So just a lot of really positive financial and economic impacts that's happening within the industry that's not just benefiting the city's general fund or Visit Bend, but the entire industry and folks who rely on these dollars to put food on the table at the end of the day. Do I need to get closer?
No.
This graphic here is really kind of our guiding light as an organization. And it's really important for us to understand that even though our marching orders from the city and at the very top of our contract, it says that our job is to maximize returns to the general fund, we understand that it's far more nuanced and balanced than that. And so while we invest a large amount of our money into those economic impact related areas, generating tourism spending, we also understand that without supporting the folks who make this place special, or the environment that makes this place special, we can't find success in that economic area. So it's really important that we're thinking about investing in the people, investing in the place, and also ultimately supporting this economy that's going to continue to regenerate those outcomes. Quickly, as I mentioned, we're halfway through the fiscal year, and we didn't have a January meeting, but that's all right because a lot of these numbers are lagging indicators. So the way that transient room tax collections work are that when Visit Bend and the city ultimately receive the money related to this activity, there's about a month lag because the operators have to remit that money. The city's financing department has to make sure it all came in, and then they have to report out on it. So what we're seeing is, I'm gonna try to make that smaller. It didn't. Is that about, so 5 months into the fiscal year, the city of Bend has received about $7,221,000 in room tax collections total, which is off about 1.7% year to date. The county is also seeing a year-to-year difference of a negative 1.7%. But what I want to point out is that we're coming off of several truly record-breaking years. So you can see fiscal year 21, 22, room tax collections were up 31.7% year over year. So this isn't so much an opportunity to find panic in the numbers, but more, I think, just a right sizing of the economy and what we're looking at. And we continue to see, based on our financial outlook, some pretty optimistic numbers and reasons to at least see the industry remaining flat over the coming year. What that means from that breakdown that I showed earlier in the pie chart, those first 5 months of the fiscal year, is that about $4,665,000 almost has been allocated to the general fund, supporting police and fire, roads, and other core services. And that remaining 2.556 million number going into support efforts driven by Visit Bend. This chart is something that I threw in at the last minute. I think Ben already used to present to a group last week, but what I really wanted to underscore here is that Bend is still a vacation destination that is at the mercy of Mother Nature. And so this chart, the blue line on top is daily hotel occupancy from January 1st to January 20th, 2023. The green line that's underneath is this current year. So we have data right now from January 1st through the 20th. And you can really see that things started off the month on a positive note. Occupancy was above year over year numbers. And then the forecast started to come out and everybody started to panic. And then the night of January 8th, ODOT issued a travel advisory, and that just turned into this magnificent storm that ultimately left folks in parts of the valley without power for up to 2 weeks. And what we know is that while it's great to have snow in the mountains for people to come here and recreate, they ultimately cannot do that if they can't get here. And so luckily, if there's a bright spot in this data, it's that January is a traditionally lower month for room tax collections. But the fact that this impact happened on arguably the most important month from a revenue collection standpoint is going to have an impact not only on our industry, but on the city's general fund and, you know, ramifications down the road. So what we're seeing is some of the early numbers. Unfortunately, I won't get the most recent numbers until tomorrow or Wednesday, but things are starting to come back normal, and we're seeing that more flat trajectory through the last month of, or through the last week of the last month. From a much more wider standpoint, the United States, this is occupancy from the month of November or December. And so the way that the industry looks at occupancy is that you have your total supply number, which are the total number of rooms available for lodging. And then you have your supply number, which is the total number of rooms being demand and supply, but available and actually being used. And when you put those numbers together, you see the United States is off about 1.8% for the month of December from an occupancy standpoint. Here on the West Coast, California, our region, and largely driven by good numbers out of California, is doing slightly better than the United States. The state of Oregon is off 3.3%. Eastern Oregon, you can see, is off almost 5%. The Columbia River Gorge is off nearly 9%. Here in Central Oregon, we're looking at being off about 1.5% year to date for December. But City of Bend, a little bright spot, up 0.2%. So we'll celebrate that. And I will say too that this is just hotel numbers. It's not Airbnb, which you know is a significant portion of the revenue that comes in. Those numbers are largely flat and slightly declining year to date, driven by just consumer behavior more than anything else. You know, a lot of news articles out there about how people are upset at Airbnb for the fees they charge and all those things. So they're making decisions with their wallets. Now I'm just going to dive into sort of some of the stuff. So for those of you who are new, we present our annual business plan to the BDAB in the spring of every year. That ultimately gets approved or not. And those suggestions are moved on to City Council, who ultimately votes on our plan in June. These next updates that I'm going to walk you through are in line with what we presented to BDAB last spring and what we said we would set out to do. So one of the things that we realized, driven by our data coming out of the pandemic, is that Bend was no longer top of mind as a destination to visit in the Pacific Northwest. Not only did we have a ton of new residents, but Visit Bend as an organization didn't market for almost 2 years because of the pandemic. We didn't want a ton of new folks coming in here. We had a really tight working relationship with City Council, and it was important to us that we weren't saying, hey, come here in the middle of a pandemic. And what came out of all of that data was the awareness to dive into the customer journey and figure out where we can be most effective in ensuring that Bend is top of mind anymore. So this chart in front of you really shows the shaded boxes of where Visit Bend is being active in their marketing efforts in order to drive those results. So whether it's things like audio or print or sponsorships or display advertising or video advertising, or blog and search marketing, or even the owned media efforts on our website, we're trying to be very thoughtful and intentional, not only how we market, but to make sure that it has an impact across all of these categories. So about 85% of our marketing falls within that awareness stage, another 76.9% falls within that awareness stage, and then that about 30% falls into that planning stage. We're really focused on those earlier customer journey phases. How that looks in real world implementation is one of the ways we're finding success is in our influencer partnerships. So our influencer program is seeing an almost 17,000% ROI. I had to test those numbers a billion times and tried 2 different calculators to make sure it was all working, but we've spent about $60,000 on these partnerships, and we're seeing close to a $10.2 million media value from these influencers. So it's incredible partnerships that we put a lot of work into cultivating, and then making sure that when they see the light of day to folks in the public, that they're touching all of those things that Visit Bend cares about. So it's not just making sure that that economic activity has happened, but we're talking about the places and making sure that folks who see our messaging are responsibly educated. So you can see in some of these captions that we screenshotted here and put on the deck that folks talking about leave no trace stuff. We're helping to educate folks on how to behave responsibly. We worked with Leave No Trace to become the first destination organization in the state of Oregon to have an official partnership with them. And then we worked with our local land managers to develop these 7 principles specific to our region, which has been really important. And it's also important to us to make sure that from a social equity lens that we're representing folks who might not look like most people in Bend, but make sure that they know that they feel like they're welcome here when they're coming here. Time check. Doing all right. Last piece I just wanted to highlight was about 2 weeks ago, Visit Bend launched a new website. This new website is really built from the ground up to balance that user experience in a very positive way with still supporting the industry. And what's important from that standpoint is that about 85% of our users are on mobile devices. So we built this to be very mobile focused, but we also leveraged a lot of local talent to contribute in a way that the content on this site, whether it's photography, videography, blog content, journals, event postings, that it's all sourced from locals who really have a sense of pride in this place, and that shows through in the way that we and the way that we show this website off to the world. So we're really excited about it. Encourage you all to take a dive into what that looks like. 2 years ago, Visit Bend and Visit Central Oregon came together to hire our first workforce development coordinator. It was one of the very first positions like that in the state. And really it came out of this need as we started talking to business owners that not only was the pipeline not full for them to be able to go out and have a successful business and hire the amount of folks that they needed to, but also that pipeline, when they were onboarded, they were woefully unprepared for the challenges that they were going to face. And what Jamie, who's our workforce development director, has been doing is just spending a lot of time meeting with these businesses to make sure that they feel supported by the industry, and that if there are gaps that nobody's addressing, that we're able to step in and provide that support. So amongst all of these assessments that she's doing both in person and sending out surveys, the biggest thing that was a takeaway was that, like I said, those employees didn't feel like they had the skills to properly represent the business and to provide ultimately a good experience for the visitors. And the guest gold service training is something that now we've had about 20 different participants in, and those folks are from hotels, they're from restaurants, they're folks who are entertainers in the industry. And so it's across the spectrum. And ultimately what that leaves them with is this internationally accredited credential that is going to allow them to support their business that they're an employer of a lot better, and also hopefully, you know, make sure that their career path is something that they're going to find a lot more value in. And I'm going to turn it over to Todd for the last slide before we open it up to Q&A.
So I didn't realize there was some newer members here. So I just wanted to first start off that representing the board, I would say that we understand that we live in a world-class destination, and it really is. And if you look at a lot of the stats that are out there, Bend is a special place. But we also understand that there are, just like any product, whether it's a phone or anything, there's a natural life cycle. And it's in our best interest to make sure that folks can enjoy Bend 50 years from now. Future generations of residents and visitors can have that same experience that we have now. So the budget plan that was presented last year, that'll be presented this year again and updated, is a reflection of that. And one way that we really do this to make sure we're in line with the community needs is this sentiment study, these resident sentiments. It's something that I work with over about 100+ destinations through Oregon State. And I think it's sometimes lost, but Visit Bend is really one of the leading DMOs in the nation. It is recognized Partner of the Year with Leave No Trace. It's often used as a model. The Sustainability Fund is used as a model for other DMOs to potentially implement. And Nate and the group are often referenced and contacted by DMOs from across the nation, if not the world, with Destination Think coming in town. So we're trying to be proactive. We're trying to plan ahead. We're trying to make sure that that experience is the same, and it's a fragile place. People come here for the environment and also for the culture and the community. And so we take that job very seriously. So with that, one of the things we do is we measure. This is a benchmark survey. We have 100+ destinations working at the University of Montana, Northern Arizona University, actually some international partners as well in Visit Iceland, as well as Costa Rica, where we measure the benefits and costs of tourism. And then we ask a lot of specific questions about what are your tax priorities with tax revenue? Where would you like that revenue spent? We saw a 2-point gain in Bend. We were at 51, now it's at 53, so there's a slight increase. But what's promising about that is they weren't aware of all the funds and projects that have been funded through the Sustainability Tourism Fund. And if you haven't had a chance, I'd recommend take a look at that video. There's some really cool stuff happening around that and that dual use facility for both locals and visitors to enjoy, like the bike park and things like that in different trailheads. So happy to answer any questions that come up at the end.
Yeah, we're there. So
There we go.
floor is yours. I know we threw a lot at you, so.
Hey, thank you. Are these on already? Yeah, okay, cool. Hey, thanks. That's, love the work that you're doing. Quick question as the sort of since my background's in workforce, how's your connection, just educate me and maybe some of the members to the Workforce Development Board? Is there a tight connection there? I know Heather's not here today, but just curious how that's aligned and how those two organizations are working together.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I've got some notes here. At the end of the day, it is something that we understand that like you have to work with these other groups to make sure that we're making progress here. So off the top of my list, we're working with folks like East Cascades Works, all of the local regional groups who are coming together. I know East Cascades Works is kind of the big one to help have that more regional draw. But Jamie is involved in almost all of those organizations at one way or another, and then making sure just basically that not only the industry has a seat and ability to have those conversations, but a way to have two-way conversations, I guess, so that we're bringing those needs from the industry back to the larger workforce groups. And also, if there are any best practices coming out of other industries, I think it's important to us to recognize those successes and figure out how we can apply them to our own industry.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks.
You mentioned the impact of the storm last couple weeks ago. I wasn't here this summer. You probably measure the impact of wildfire smoke similarly. Just off the top of your head, is that a similar thing? Like 20% once a wildfire hits?
It is not as drastically. I think one of the goals of our organization over the past several years, and really the industry, has been to diversify those tourism offerings so we're not as reliant on outdoor recreation. What's great is that now whether it's our arts and culture scene or it's our, indoor amenities scene, there are lots of opportunities for folks to still come here in the wintertime and have a positive vacation experience without necessarily having to spend as much time inside or outside. But it's something we're really paying attention to. It's, on our SWOT analysis, it's still that big like threat, right? And it's the unknown. And it's not only something that myopically impacts Bend, but it impacts our entire region and the West Coast. And there's so much more to come out of that and so many conversations that we're having. But it's definitely something that we're paying attention to and something that we're concerned about for sure.
I would just add that, August in Bend used to be a peak period, right? And for years and years. And so now we look at, I don't know, last 4 out of the 6, last 3 out of the 6, where smoke has significantly impacted that the economics of it. So it's something that you see folks like Travel Oregon and other groups really starting to get into in terms of working with the Forest Service and being proactive. And, it's not really in the mission of tourism, but it's certainly a place we need to have a seat at the table. And that's what's happening now.
One other question on the influencers. You say you spent 60,000 on influencer marketing to generate over 10 million in revenue. Which is incredible. And does that scale? Do you think you can spend, double that, triple that, quintuple that and get 40 million? Or or are you hitting diminishing returns?
It's I would say somewhere in the middle is where the truth lies. It's definitely scalable. The reason that we find so much success with this is really the team who makes it happen. So there is a lot of work that goes into, I would say like 90% of the work happens before these influencers even show up in town. And we're not only vetting them to make sure that their audience aligns with our audience and those sorts of things, but looking at the impact that they've had in previous relationships. We have pretty advanced AI powered software that allows us to look into not only those past partnerships that they've had, but what types of content drives that value, that media value, and how we can hand select these folks who align with our ability to have positive impacts across these social, economic, and environmental pieces, while also understanding that they're going to have a positive impact for Visit Bend as well as for the partners that we work with and those environments. So it's scalable to a certain extent, but it's really important that we're selective still in that process to ensure that we're identifying those outcomes early on in the journey.
Got it. So when you say a lot of the work's ahead of time, you mean like planning the events and what's going to be featured in those social media posts?
Yeah, it's not even that. So we truly believe that these folks, they have a following because of the voice that they've created, the audience that they've created, and we want that to be an authentic experience for the folks who are consuming their media as well. So we aren't telling them what to say in any way that's even verbatim. We're organizing a few of the activities, but we're really allowing them to have their own Bend experience because we feel like that's important throughout the whole thing. But the work that goes into that is more just like identifying these folks and then going through all of the analytics and the data to make sure that pencils out that they are going to provide that positive return on the investment.
Got it. Awesome.
And then the dollars you're talking about are earned media value,
Yeah.
not necessarily relating to sales in
Yes,
town, right?
yeah, that's very important. Very important distinction. Thank you, Brenda. Yeah, it's the earned media value, this is all AI generated, algorithm driven. So there's certainly some debatable pieces to it all. But at the end of the day, every influencer who's part of our tracking program and that data has values associated to the type of post. It depends on what their audience looks like at the time, how far the reach was, what the engagement was like, all of these metrics that I could probably geek out on for a long time. I won't bore you with, but yeah, so it's that overall media value. It's not direct spending that they're generating.
And then there's no way to actually measure that, right? It's impossible, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we are tracking visitor spending, and that's some of those numbers I alluded to earlier in the presentation around that total economic impact of visitor spending, but there's no way to say Andy from Medford generated.
Right.
Yeah.
And probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the end, you're after overall results anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not about us, it's about the place and it's about the businesses that make this place special really and the people and having that positive impact.
Okay, anybody else? Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Question from Mark online there.
Yeah, just a quick question. The Visit Bend is a great resource, as you guys talked about. I've been very impressed with it. How do you go about deciding what events or what concepts get talked about on Visit Bend and which ones don't. The outdoor stuff is pretty easy to do. I'm talking about events and things like that, music. How do you decide which ones to include, which ones not to include, or do you kind of allow folks who want to take the time to come on board to fill out their own things?
Yeah, it's really both of what you said. We're always encouraging folks to come in and meet us. Ultimately, we can be the best ally in this space if we're knowledgeable to what's going on, and then we can cultivate a plan to support those folks. It's also very seasonal. One of the things that's important about to bring up about the way that Visit Bend operates is that about 90% of our marketing efforts happen in non-summer months. You saw that chart and the way it was declining going into the winter and the fall. And we know that Bend is pretty full in the summertime. So a lot of our messaging and marketing is more of that responsible education, just being helpful guides to folks visiting, and then really turning it up around the event space, around outdoor recreation and the indoor fun and those places that we can have that larger economic impact in those non-summer months. Our filter for events is that really it has to be something that's going to have that substantial use by visitors. So that's the filter in which we look through that with. And then we support them not only through some of those like sponsorship things, but also through the Bend Cultural Tourism Fund, which again is organized in a point system that's ultimately awarded largely based on seasonality amongst the other factors that it's evaluated by. So it's a lot of things, but definitely has to have a substantial impact for visitors, and it's got to fit that seasonality checklist as well, because that's important to us.
That makes sense. Great, thanks.
All right, I don't see anybody else with a hand up online. Anybody in here? Great, thank you.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Not for the fun stuff.
Comment. I think we've got more folks than usual. So I see one name I don't recognize in the attendee list online. So Brendan Faber, if you want to give public comment, you can raise your hand at the bottom of your screen and we'll allow you to unmute. And then are there folks in here hoping to give public comment today? I see potentially.
Yeah, I want to.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course. Okay. Okay. So we got some folks. Let's start with Brendan, if that works, the online public commenter, and then we'll.
Oh, good.
All right, Brendan. Let's see if I can. Gina, can you allow Brendan to unmute?
Yeah, hold on one second. Okay, go ahead and talk, Brendan.
Oh, well, thank you. My name is Brendan Faber. I'm a resident here in Bend. I wanted to first thank Stan Mile for plugging me into the meeting, and I'm also happy to see my good friend Mark Cronky is on the board. So just really thanks for the information. So I'm just here to soak in what I can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and I think we've got quite a few folks in here. So Sam, I saw you raise your hand. If you want to jump up here and just make sure you talk into the mic, and I think we have a small enough group of commenters. We won't bother with the timer or any of that stuff if that works for the board.
I won't be too long. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you allowing me the time to speak. I'm from Merite Hotels. We have 2 hotels here in Bend and 16 within the region. Again, I wanted to say thank you so much, and I wanted to comment about the transportation utility fee that's going to be potentially imposed in July. And for myself and our company, we wanted to take this moment to express some concerns. For one, for us, it's highly concerning, and I know for most of you, being from a myriad of background of businesses, you're familiar obviously with how we do budgets, and for our hotels, we are not on a fiscal year, we're on a calendar year, and so we've already put our budgets in place. And then in January, unannounced, we find out Pacific Power has a very large increase on utilities. And then shortly after, we hear that there might be a $4 to $6 fee per room, possibly on hotels or on square footage, but we're not quite sure yet. And so for us, where we already have budgets spent or planned for the year, this is very concerning. And over the last couple of years, we've seen wage growth, which is wonderful for all of our employees in our community, go up quite a bit, along with other costs as well that have
gone up quite a bit too, and our rates overall haven't gone up as much. So we're now asking our managers and our hotels to sort of plan for this unknown expense that's coming in July. And the bottom line is the main factor that we can manage for costs is going to be labor. My concern when we have a very large fee that's coming up that's not budgeted for, it's going to directly impact labor. And we've already started to see this over the last few years. More and more restaurants now have eliminated server positions. There's chalkboard signs that say, please bust your dishes with a smiley face. There's an iPad instead of a bartender or a server coming up and taking your order. My fear is that the wage growth that we've seen over the last few years in Bend is going to start to recede. It's going to impact the very individuals that we've been trying to help over the last few years with affordability and livability. And so I've already started to look at some of the wages posted in hotels. It doesn't seem like it's tracking how it was last year, where we're starting to see wage growth that's continued more and more and more. My fear is that when we start to see these fees come out, and again, I don't know exactly what it is, so that is highly concerning. I've heard that it's going to go up for the next 3 years. My fear is that we're going to have to look at how much we're paying our line level staff and start to lower the starting wage. Are we going to have to look at our benefits package? That's not why we're in this industry. Hospitality is a people first industry. That's why we're all in here. And I always tell our employees, I can't pay you what you're worth. I would love to. I pay you with what the market values, what the job is at. And my fear is that as we tack on more and more of these fees, it's going to be the opposite impact of that. So I'll ask that when you are looking at special categories and including hotels, please come talk to the hotels first and see what might work. I'm a big fan of incentives. If there's behaviors that companies or industries are doing that you'd like to change, come talk to us and see what can motivate us to change, not just penalize us. But again, thank you very much for the comments today. I appreciate it. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thanks.
Daniel, do you want? Sure. We don't have a sign-in sheet. We'll need to. We usually have like one comment, so thank you all for being here.
I'll be really short. I'm Daniel Elder. I'm with Campfire Hotel. Thank you for your time. Just going to echo everything that Sam just said. Our ownership is pretty concerned about another fee coming, in addition to all the other, property taxes and other tourism taxes that hotels are doing. And Sam's absolutely right. I mean, this is going to directly impact our labor, and we do have budgets that are already out with, and yeah, it's not going to shut doors. I don't think. At least Campfire is going to stay open if this thing goes into place. But it would be nice to have some more information on what these details actually look like, and being able to be a part of the conversation too. I think would be really important for us. But yeah, it definitely feels like hotels are usually the target when it comes to taxes and tourism. And I don't know that this is necessarily the answer for this particular tax. And again, I think that that's where we need to have maybe a bigger conversation. And I do think that, people like Sam Johnson and Brandon over at the River House have really, really good insight and ideas. And I think we have a lot to offer as far as, ways to make something like this work. But it's definitely concerning, and would love to be part of the conversation. So that's all I got.
Anyone else there? Brandon, I think I said.
I'm glad I waited. I had no idea what this was entailed and whether it was going to be questions or I just needed to make a statement. So I'll just make a statement instead. Brandon Tyler, River House on the Deschutes general manager. First and foremost, kudos to all of you for what you do here for the city of Bend. Obviously the roads need some work and we don't disagree, and we're right there with you. I think, just echoing what fellow GMs are saying prior to me, it's just my biggest concern is where does it stop, right? And how do you ask our opinion on what it's worth, right? So if you're just looking for a number, $5 per room gets you a number, but that, call it $40,000 over the course of the year, what could we have generated in occupancy to generate more room tax, right? are things that should be thought about and considered in there. We've done events that would cost us just as much as this would, and been able to, for New Year's, for example, raise $16,000 for nonprofits, right? So we're investing in the community in a bunch of other ways that generates room taxes, but it also gives back to the community and raises funds. And so I just think while you're making the decision, just take into consideration, we're all professionals that we want to put more heads in beds and we want to hire more employees. But if we just have a fee that just nonchalantly increases, you're taking that out of our hands and we just lose that money and we have no control over it. So just please think about that as you go into your thought process.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else?
Anybody else waiting for the next exciting discussion? Okay, no more public comment. And we can move on to the SDC and transportation fee updates. Chris
Perfect.
and Ben.
And we don't have a presentation today. I think wanted to see what questions came up on the public comment. Really, council took on board BDAB's feedback around phasing in the transportation fee at their meeting. I think that was in January, right? Yeah, and they've had some follow-up conversations since then. Should be able to come back to BDAB in the next couple of months around what does it take to get to phase 2 in terms of timing. We're certainly looking at getting that data in a manner that we could launch phase 2 by July 1st, 2025 at the latest. That's kind of what we're building back from, and that aligns with our fiscal years as well. I think those were the two big parts of the transportation fee. Oh, and what we keep calling softening the tail. There was buy-in there with council around maybe not just like with BDAB committing to hard and fast numbers around where those breakpoints are if you're a very large space. But really, I think in March, bringing back some of those discussions there. And for folks here that weighed in, there's 2 council listening sessions as well. One on February 26th here in council chambers at 4:30 p.m. and another on February 29th at 9:30 a.m. Those are both times that through our communication with the business community, and I think our partners like the chamber as well, really trying to push businesses to weigh in there. So if folks weighed in here and are willing to come back again, I think that would be great. It'll be council sitting up here. And if there are BDAB members that would like to attend one of those but each and kind of report back at your March 4th meeting, I think that would just be useful as well. BDAB will have another chance to kind of finalize some feedback or at least consolidate the feedback you've received before I think the next kind of major council discussion is March 6th.
I was actually pulling up my calendar.
So that was on the transportation fee. There's a work session on Wednesday.
Yeah, I can go through
that-
kind of schedule events here. if you want me to do it.
Perfect. That'd be great.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Russ Grayson, I'm the Chief Operations Officer. So since we have a lot of people in the audience, I'll give a little bit more background of where we're at and kind of where we're heading. So over the past year, basically, we've been working on policy development around both the transportation fee and the SDC methodology. And we're really moving into kind of called more official public comment period right now. So with the transportation fee, that starts Wednesday night with a work session, which we will kind of put the final numbers out there in terms of what we're proposing. And along with that, hopefully by the end of this week, both the kind of the fee schedule and the proposed code will be posted for review by the public. There are 2 listening sessions, as Ben pointed out, in the latter half of February to receive comments on this. We'll be coming back to council on March 6th at a final work session to get any feedback based off of the comments that were received, not only at the listening sessions, but also from the public in general over the next month. And then the current plan is to bring back the actual decision point to council at their second meeting in March on the 20th, which will be a public hearing. And there will be availability for the public to comment as well there. So I know that there has been a lot of information that's been put out there. The numbers have changed over have been changing slightly as we've been working through all the data and information as we did with BDAB, but also over the course of the past year. that was all in preparation for getting us to this point, to have this work session, to put the numbers out there so that the public can actually respond to kind of what the final proposal is at this point. It still may be modified between now and by the time it's adopted in March, but it is kind of at that point where we're ready to put it out for full public comment with all the information. And if there, as that information is released, if there's questions, either I or Sarah Hudson, who's the kind of the program manager, project manager that's been working on this, we can help provide additional information, context to anybody who may have questions during that time. So I'll stop there and then I'll go into the system development charges next around this. So are there any questions from anyone from that? This is just, yeah, just a kind of a general update of where we are and where we're going.
Question. We've been talking for a while about getting a comprehensive document together that outlines and represents all the current discussed fees. Where are we at with that piece? And I know this is relatable to the FDC conversation as well, obviously, but.
Yeah, there's been multiple conversations going on that. We're actually working right now with the chamber to identify a list of projects. I sent over a list of projects to them. They're reviewing that right now. Once we get that back, we're looking at doing kind of two basic comparisons. One around the system development charges and permit fees, which is kind of that upfront capital cost to get a building out of the ground. And then we're doing another analysis on kind of the ongoing operational impacts around taxes, levies, the transportation fee, to provide greater context, because I know that has been something that has been requested by several groups, including BDAB. So we're working on that right now. And hopefully we can get that information out as soon as we get those projects. Hopefully we can turn that around pretty fast.
Yeah, and Cyrus will give a brief update on that at the end of this meeting as well. Probably starting with something relatively simple, and then how do we build on it with BDAB's help?
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So if there's no other questions there, I'll just go to the system development charges real fast. So we're kind of alternating months here. So the goal with the system development charges is we released the initial methodology. That happened back in November. We had a work session in January. Basically, we received the majority of the comments about a day or 2 days before that hearing. Once we received that information and had a discussion with council at their work session, actually, it was at the hearing, actually, when that information came in, we have, we basically tabled it and postponed it until a meeting in April. So what we're doing right now is we have another work session. We're gathering all the feedback that we received at that public hearing. We are going to make some modifications to the methodology based off of that feedback. We're having discussions with a lot of groups right now, including, we got a lot of information from the medical group that they were concerned around that. So we're reaching out to them. I've had meetings with them last week, and I have another one this afternoon with some of the representatives, working with schools and parks. Obviously want to get information out to this group again, so we can get greater feedback. So the goal is to have a work session again with council at the second meeting in February, on February 21st. Release the new updated methodology, hopefully by that first week in March, then have all of March again for public comment from everyone, and bring it back to council for a continued public hearing at their second meeting in April, which would be April 17th right now. So there's been a lot of discussions around the non-residential side of that and the impacts of those fees. So we're trying to get some information again. So just talked about some comparisons and things like that, so we can look at other certain categories that we may want to propose a phase in or some type of implementation schedule around to help soften kind of how those fees are impacting some particular categories on the non-residential side. So, not much going on in the transportation world.
You didn't think it was going to be easy, did you?
Nothing is easy. That's one thing I can guarantee. But we want to make sure that we're being as transparent about the information as we can, and putting out, we are now basically in the full kind of public comment period for both of these things. We've been working on it for a long time to get to this point where we have something that we're putting out that is based on some type of sound methodology. So now we're releasing that, and we're encouraging people to review it and let us know their comments.
So Wednesday night's meeting is what again? Sorry.
This Wednesday is a kind of our final work session on the transportation fee before we release the proposed code that will go into the Bend Municipal Code, as well as the related fee schedule that will outline how residential and all the non-residential categories will be assessed for that. We want to we have a couple final questions for council around that. Once we have that, then we'll final the documents and release them hopefully by the end of this week. And then have almost a full month of public comment, and including those 2 listening sessions that Ben mentioned. If anyone has any questions, they can always reach out to me and we can explain all the schedule for them. But we're trying to get as much feedback and comments as we can because we do realize this is impactful.
For us, for clarification, are the special unit categories also going to be included in the fee schedule?
Yes.
Released on this?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. And those special categories are, and this is based off of previous conversations with council, we will outline that square footage kind of tier schedule that we talked about, that we worked with BDAB before the end of the year. And then there's also categories for schools, Ben Lapine schools, parks, and hotels, and they're based off of a transportation methodology and data. We're not just picking numbers somewhere. They're based off of kind of people are familiar with the Institute of Transportation Engineer methodology and that.
Perfect.
All right.
And we'll send a follow-up email to BDAB members after this meeting and plug those 2 dates for the listening sessions. And if anyone wants to jump in and report back at your March meeting, I think that would be useful.
And there are website pages for both the transportation fee and the SDCs online, and we will be pushing out a lot of communications about both of these things as those events happen. And including, we'll get information to Ben so we can push it out through his network as well, through BDAB. All right, thank you.
That's good. Thanks, Russ. All right, EDCO quarterly update, Dawn and Brian.
Yeah, and just to tee this up, very similar to the Visit Bend update, part of our contract with EDCO includes quarterly updates as a deliverable. Somewhat dissimilar from Visit Bend, BDAB really does set the scope of work for EDCO every 2 years. We contract directly. It's a staff-driven with council approval type of contract process. Visit Bend's is a little different. There's maybe more policymaker input, elected policymaker input in that. Not going to change course right now, but I think you do have the opportunity to maybe ask questions around scope of work and provide feedback in a manner that maybe is a little bit different than the business.
Well, good.
Cool.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Mill, the Bend Area Director for EDCO. And with me today here is Brian Vieira, our Venture Catalyst. And this presentation is pretty brief. It's really kind of an update on what's going on and what we see in the rearview mirror or our forward view. Not so much thought about for new members and so on. So my idea for handling that is meeting with you guys. In fact, I don't think I've actually spent some off-camera time with some of you. So, and the folks on camera. So this presentation really just covers the last 6 months, which is the first 6 months of the 2-year biennium contract that EDCO has with the city, which ends in June of 25. We're really just going to cover our Move, Start, Grow strategy. Our mission, a little bit to those who haven't worked with EDCO directly, our mission is really simple. Our Move, Start, Grow strategy is meant to expand middle income jobs and diversify the economy, period. Everything we do is hedged on that. Also, in the Visit Bend presentation, we talked about their funding a little bit. A little background on ours. Our EDCO funding, about 60% of our total funding comes from what we call private sources, which are events, which help fund the machine, and also membership. The other roughly 40% is through contracts with various cities in the region, in the county. So that's pretty simple. We have occasionally from 1 year to another, we may have a contract with a grant with the state for doing something that sort of isn't very consistent. We don't really plan on it, and we don't have one currently. So, you know, our move strategy is to identify those companies that we believe would be successful to meet our mission here in Bend. We try to identify them, we attract them, and then actually physically try to get them here, facilitate that move. Our start method is really just to help entrepreneurs from thought through exit. and Brian carries that ball all by himself, and we support him in that. Where we spend most of our times in the organization at EDCO is with following our growth strategy, and that's supporting our current traded sector businesses stay here, expand here. And we do that in a variety of ways. We help with site selection. We manage a couple incentive programs. We're kind of a center point for just connecting resources and so on. Sometimes we just take the phone and solve an odd problem. So what we're going to talk about here is, first of all, we're going to talk about our activities, the kind of things we do day to day to make it happen. Then we're going to talk about the pipeline, which is those projects that are before us today that we're working on. And then we'll finish off with our done deals, which are the deals we most recently completed in the last 6 months, again, in December. Looking at our events is really, it's just a support structure for our strategy is to support our Move, Start, Grow, getting people together, sometimes just to network and sometimes for real educational processes. Ben Venture Conference has been our mainstay. We're continue to be the largest angel conference in the Pacific Northwest. Brian is appointed spear on that every year, not only in putting the conference on, although we have a team that helps him, but really in refining the program and identifying the companies and working with the companies to make it or not. Our participation there has been pretty consistent. It was down a little bit, but we're back to a little over 400. It's actually 10% over the year before, so that's not bad. Pub Talk is our mainstay networking event. It's been pretty steady. The actual numbers there are about the same. I don't have an exact count, but we're back to pre-COVID levels and doing quite well. The luncheon, which is Thursday, we'll have almost 800 people at that meeting. And we're down to probably 30 or 40 on the wait list. It was higher than that, and we take those calls every day. So that's a nice feeling. People appreciate what we do, and it's a lot of people in Bend. The Made in Bend tour is kind of a fun project. We haven't done it for the last 2 years, where we actually make available some of our companies to actually feel, touch, smell. This year, it's likely to be a walking tour, which is going to be kind of neat. There's only a couple places in town that we can do that, where we can find 4 companies that are making something and are within walking distance. So that'll be kind of fun. We figure we'll sell that out of over 100 folks as well. Let's talk here about now what we do for our activities. Our move activities, we've purposely dialed them back. The city of Bend and the county have supported that, try to take the ease off some of the pressure we have for housing and childcare and wages and workforce. So we dialed that back, but we have adopted and designed a digital marketing strategy where we actually use the profile of our move candidate companies over the years, what they look and smell like, and we created a digital tool to find those folks. So it's early to see if it's successful or not. We believe that what we will find in candidates for recruitment there will be warmer just from the get-go, and that should be a good thing. Looking here at the digital marketing strategy, you can see it's almost 60% of our total leads this year currently that we're working on today. Looking next at the tracking results for the start, that's where I get to pause for a minute, and Brian will kind of guide you through that.
Yeah, so just for those who know me, I was at EDCO for about 7 years, from 2014 to just before COVID started, like in earnest. Well, no, I was actually there for a year while COVID was rolling. Went over to work for a startup that was based in Portland, stayed here, just kind of commuted back and forth. I was a remote worker for them primarily for about 2.5 years. I got engaged with that company through BVC actually, and then stepped away from that role about 6 months ago and came back to EDCO to help get through BVC, and then stayed on. So yeah, picking up the portfolio was really kind of a teardown because the role was vacant for about a year plus. So I cut, which was a group of about 130 companies, down to 60, and I'm rebuilding it now. So it's a true reflection of the activity, as best I can tell, what's going on in Portland. In coaching sessions, that's about what typically happens in a 3-month period. So 1 a day on the company coaching sessions. The number there for BVC, the 560,000 raised, is just kind of a starting point for the actual amounts that are raised by companies. So that's already turned into 2 million since October. of follow-on investment or increases in the initial commitment that a funder made. So that was the number that we could reliably put down at the time, but it's always, and it has been every year that I've done it. It's always been much lower at BVC than later. Cool. Any questions on that?
Moving back to the grow element. What I do, it's primarily my responsibility is to help our companies grow and retain folks. And I do that through outreach, and that's contacting all of our traded sector businesses, where there's about 450 in Bend. They're all my responsibility. All 450 aren't active, obviously, probably about 200 I touch every year and do something for them. About 100, I do a couple things, and there's about 20 to 40 that I do a lot for. So, and that mix changes every year. I spend, so the outreach, obviously it ebbs and flows. If I'm going to touch, every 18 months, 450 companies, I've got to be active. I've got to be out there talking to them. And I do it on a selective basis, really, because I don't want to just put in a call and have it never returned. I usually look for a reason to do it. And I think it helps my contact rate. Assistant referrals is where I visit with companies and solve a problem either on the spot, by giving them a referral to a resource that attacks the problem that they're dealing with, or I actually do something for them. And that's really the fun part of my job, is I just get to help people every day. They're generally appreciative here in Bend, as Bend folks tend to be, and that's really rewarding. What I'd spend more and more time on are the things we just had at the prior speakers, and that is the infrastructure that's happening to Bend here, whether it be housing, the innovation lab, which Brian really leads our efforts on that, but that's a really attractive and great project. He may speak about it later. I'm not sure his plans. The airport has some resources out there, has about 40 acres of land for development. We know that Epic, who is out there today, is growing very fast, so there's opportunities for economic development on that real estate. Permitting legislative support. I'm involved with the Division Bend. So more of we call it table setting, where it's not talking to companies, but it's helping to preserve an environment that we grow positively. Most recently, Juniper Ridge, the RFP for what will be a lot of acres is now about 100 acres. That RFP to sell that land to developers for development, give the city a chance not to be in the development business directly anymore, which I think the city's happy about. That ended on the 31st, and I don't see it on the agenda. It probably will be soon, but I'm excited to find out what the feedback was on that. So moving on to that's what our activities have shown. That's kind of the stuff we do. But what we have now in our pipeline of our pending projects, we've got 84 companies, 84 projects right now. That's probably about 75 companies. We have some companies with more than one project. You can see Brian has 68. Those are active companies entrepreneurs that are working on our project. We've got 544 jobs out of those 984 projects. Most of them come out of the grow pot. You would expect that. And the anticipated capital is almost $305 million. Those are projects that are in process. They won't all close. Likely at this point they will. It's heavily dominated by the bioscience industry. All of our bioscience industry companies are growing. Juniper Ridge is a site for Saran, which is public information. Just a ton of activity, and we're happy about it. It's a stable industry. It's a relatively high paying industry. It's relatively capital intensive. So what do all those bars mean? I mean, they're relative. It's kind of colorful, and you see we've got a lot of capital coming on board, but it translates to about $25 million in annual compensation, new annual compensation by these projects alone. And I use that standard Deschutes County average wage. So it can be more likely to be more than that, not less. And it's about $3.5 million of annual property tax revenue to the county. So it's real positive money, great support. Moving on to the move, again, the little context on those done deals I just talked about. We only had one done deal in the 6 months. I only got 3, and my plan is only to get 3 a year. So back to my comment about de-emphasizing the move, it shows here. This is one company, Luno, perfect for Bend. It was an over the transom referral. They knew of Bend because they knew of our outdoor strength here. It's an outdoor company that makes car camping accessories, mattresses that are specially designed for certain model years and of trucks and vehicles. There are only 4 in the pipeline for move candidate companies. Now go back to what actually happened. This is kind of a real tactical part. You know, the businesses that we closed deal on this year, Brian will talk about some of the start companies. Probably most of them are somehow attached with BVC, but probably not all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the early stages is constantly churning, right? So when I came into it, I've been back in the role for about 6 months. Some of that portfolio that I looked at that drives towards done deals, and done deals are financings, starts of companies or other major milestones, right? So a company starts and hires people, or it brings in a tranche of financing. Usually I count that as 100,000 or more, like the small friends and family type stuff. I don't count that, but there's a lot of activity going on in Bend, and that was apparent when I started, became more apparent when we went through BVC. We had the most number of applicants that we'd ever had, either from Bend or in total was 115 applicants. I think the most we'd had before that was 85 or 90. So it was just like all of a sudden a bear to process, but just overall activity in Bend seems to be kind of reigniting post-COVID. I've seen kind of like 3 waves. This would be the third if it really takes off. The first wave was kind of like in the early noughts of 2000, and then like the post real estate crisis or great financial reset, whatever the hell you want to call it, from 2008, 9, 10, that period where, what do they call that? The Great Recession. Stuff happens when things change in early stage because it presents opportunities. And what we're going through right now, I think, is another wave. These companies up here are just a small sliver of the new businesses that are starting in Bend and could take off and be, they could hire hundreds of people. On that job hiring thing, the labor environment has changed as well. So when we have new jobs here, they might not all be here. The company may be here, but people are hiring remotely at an increasing rate. There are a lot of companies, you might already know this, but it's kind of a shock to me because it happened over 3 or 4 years, but there are companies that are 100% remote. That's it. Like, you have the company here in Bend with 1 guy and 50, 75, 200 people across the country that aren't here, right? And it's easy to do. The HRIS systems out there now, you can hire somebody just as easily in Bend as you can in Washington or California's a different, but the systems are just getting better at processing that. So that's something to keep in mind too, is when we look at this, it's like, great, there's all these new companies starting here, but the caveat to that is they may not be hiring all of their employees here. And we might not need to start metricing or looking at that metric, because we don't currently. We just look at jobs here or potentially elsewhere now. So
the final view of done deals for our grow done deals, we achieved our goals from projects and new jobs, exceeded a little bit. Capital investment way exceeded it, and the done deals that we had, these 4, and you can see the logos there, they look a lot like what's in the pending projects. So it's consistent. These 4 deals represent about a little over $5 million in annual wages and a little bit or about $100,000 in annual property taxes. Let's see, I guess I would close with just sort of our picture, kind of our proud page, which is our accolades. We continue to have great support. I'll mention 3 here. They're all 2023 updates. The one, we're number 1 in most startups per capita for 2023. We were the number 1, Dutchess County, I should say, a little broader area, was number 1 in 2023 for small business owners. We were number 5 under best performing cities, which is the Milliken study, which we've quoted over the years, is probably the best and most comprehensive economic measurement. We're still in the top 10. We're proud about that. And then number 5 on best mountain town, because we are considered as a mountain town. I'm gonna skip to the last page just for a minute, and then I'm gonna come back to that one. This is a list of some resources that you might find helpful. You've probably already seen. The top one is my latest recent most favorite. Josh Leonard put out a piece about scenic areas. He was comparing Bozeman, Bend, Utah, Ashland, North Carolina, that had a similar quality to, or characteristics to Bend, and compare the economies of each of those companies. And Bend by far had a much more diverse economy than all of them, which means we've done something, long before me, have done some good work in Bend to keep it healthy, stable over the hard time. So that's probably a good one to look at. And then going back to this, the tab before that, we'll close with a discussion, answer any questions you have, but these are just 4 topics. We'll talk about Juniper Ridge. Brian may have already answered your future questions about entrepreneurial startup week, which has become a burgeoning event, which is BBC work. Seems like a really wonderful thing. I'll just touch on rising cost of business. You might have questions of Edco or Brian and me about that. And on industrial space, I'll chat there from a year ago, maybe it's been a year and a half ago. If you go on the resources that track commercial real estate, LoopNet is one that I use. You go on there, you search on whatever you wanted. I use 30,000 feet down to 3,000 feet commercial, industrial zoned. And I might be at 1 or 2 or 3. And 3 days later, they'd be 1 or 2 the same. And a week later, they'd all be different, or they'd be 0. It was just, as we all know, the capacity, inventory was low. Now, there's probably, I go on today, it's probably well over 100,000 square feet of industrial zone property that's available, which is a great thing. And it's worrisome as well. I take it from the positive, and it gives me a chance to offer more affordable space to our young companies to grow in, which is great. But it became available for reasons, and we've had companies leave here. And so we pay a lot of attention to what those specific reasons are or were, and make sure that we address them. So Juniper Ridge, I already mentioned, a really great resource for economic development. And then Ben and Matt Stewart at the real estate division leads that. It'll be great to keep track of him. I'll stop there. Any questions about Edco and Juniper Ridge?
Yeah, and just on Juniper Ridge, I mean, the RFP closed on the 31st. So just last week, I'm not sure how much we can share until it's been reviewed by council, but there were responses, 95 acres in 2 tracks that are kind of out there for folks to bid on. So as soon as I know the legality of what can or can't be shared, we'll get an update to BDAB for sure.
Question. Mention a couple things. One, tracking jobs, local versus non-local would be, I think, appropriate to do.
It would be new.
What's that?
So we actually chatted about this morning, and I believe that the way that we used to track, what was that 12%? But it included people at home.
The 12% that Damon Rudberg and others have recited is not remote workers, it's people working from home. And so he is careful about describing that, but we kind of forget that. So it's really a combination of people who are not here and then people that are here and their companies are here as well.
Right. So if we want to track what percentage of a population of labor companies are hiring here versus, then that's a new endeavor. I don't know how to do that yet. Because I only have a subset of a relevant data set, right? Like it might be something I need to talk to Damon about, but it's real. Like it's probably one of the biggest movements I've seen is you couldn't do it. The tools got infinitely better because of COVID partially, and just because technologies move forward, and you can effortlessly build a workforce. You don't have to be hiring in Bend anymore, or in Portland or Seattle or anywhere. It's happening across the entire country, and it's important, and it need to get our arms around how we measure it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from our perspective, if we're reporting on Edco's work, or reporting jobs based on Edco's work, it would be nice to know how many of those jobs and people are actually here in Central Oregon. So that's the tracking I'm talking about. I do realize there's a, kind of a national trend towards telework or, whatever you want to call it. And we've been kind of on a leading edge of that. But just from a job creation standpoint, those numbers would be interesting to know from what they are here.
Yeah, our challenge would be the flip side of that, which is the company's not here, but the employees are.
Yeah,
Right, so it has there are two sides to that coin.
Yeah, totally. And what do you expect that the industrial space, available space is indicating to you? Other than companies are leaving, but I guess to me, I would make the leap that people are leaving Bend.
I don't know the answer to that. We don't have any analytics research within EDCO. We use everybody else's. I guess my observation is that Juniper Ridge, I believe it has demand to be used, and I think it will be mostly consumed by our current companies, right? Because it's not a huge piece of parcels of land. The space it has left is like it's all anecdotal, but it's because of housing costs, or all of them had a facility or relationship in another city, Boulder, Tennessee. They had a resource to move there. So, and they all happen to be in the outdoor industry. And the outdoor industry, did so well. Everybody bought 3 years worth of equipment and supplies and toys in 2021, right? And then in 22, 23, 24, they already bought that. And so I think that's a big reason why those companies suffered.
I don't think Bend is seeing the same thing Portland is, and I was in that market because I was working downtown. 4 million square feet of inventory, and it was still increasing, right? And we also know that the population of Portland is decreasing. One of the few cities on the Pacific, right, on the West Coast to decrease. Bend is not decreasing in population. I think we do have that information. I think it's increasing still at a pretty rapid clip. So why is the industrial space, why is more inventory coming online? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Is that the same trend in office? Have you guys checked that?
Checked what?
Office space is like office space increasing similar the way industrial space is increasing, vacant office space?
Yeah, our energies are not directed there, so no, but I think the office space is, the 100,000 feet I mentioned is being consumed and is turning over. You look at Compass's last report, they had a net reduction in the vacancy a little bit. So I think directionally, I'm not sure what that means yet, but the office, not so much. So,
Yeah.
because I think there's just a fundamental excess of office based on what Brian's talking
Yeah,
about.
I think that the trend for people, at least the younger demographic, right? Like Gen Z, millennials, wanting to work from home, even if they're in the same city as the company that they are working for, that's gonna decrease demand for office space, right? You have 50 people, but only 35 of them are in every day on average. You're not gonna get 10,000 square feet. You'll get 7, right? I mean, that's exactly what we experienced in Portland. We didn't have enough office space for everybody to come in every day because they never did. So.
Not to give us more work, but I would love to flip this conversation on, because again, workforce guy. It actually came up at your pub talk. I thought was fascinating. The last one of the outdoor products was this, what's happening in the tech sector at a broader scale, layoffs coming, how many of those people are living, working here in Bend, how many moved here during the pandemic to work for companies that said, hey, you can work fully remote. Now they got to go back to the office or move back to the Bay Area or wherever that is. So there's a churn in sort of talent. I think the comment on the panel was like, well, how do we identify those folks and convince them to start, and that conversation, outdoor product companies here in Bend, because it'd be great. They're highly skilled. They might be, able to bring capital to the community, et cetera, et cetera. So I say all that, I don't know where that goes, but I think it'd be worth studying or understanding that a little bit more. Maybe it's a conversation with Heather and the chamber and others to sort of think, and you all, like, what could we be doing? I immediately thought, like, what could we be doing as BDAB? Maybe it's a question for you, to better support this entrepreneurial innovation part of Bend. And I know this is also tied into the conversation we had earlier around cost of business, et cetera. But I flip it to, I sense opportunity for the community, and, how might we better do that? And for me, it starts with, like, how do we better understand the labor force here and the talents that they have? How do we keep them here and start new companies in this town? and grow it to have the middle income jobs that you're, focused on. So I don't know if that's a comment or an ask or what that is, but I'd love to dive deeper into that. I think it'd be really informative for all of us to understand that a little better.
I do think it's a myth that companies are pulling employees out of the places that they went to.
Mm.
I think, I haven't seen any hard data on it. Like it seems to be all anecdotal, like, oh, Google's laying off 1,500 people, or the
Yeah.
X company's requiring people to come back to work. But I haven't seen it.
Hmm.
Most companies, I don't think are. If they did actually take a stance, like a policy, documented policy to define hybrid as 2-3, or if you're defined as remote, you're remote. Usually if you're defined as a remote worker, you're remote. You can't switch somebody's designation after they've already been defined as remote. So
Yeah.
it's kind of an HR quagmire, right? To like,
Yeah, it is certainly complex. I think there's, from some of the, just anecdotally from colleagues in the sector, they're more open to considering other positions now because the threat or the unknown of what that policy change or what it might be. So, not to single out certain companies, but like there are some in town, they're like, well, yeah, if the right opportunity presented itself, right, or if I had the right resources to start my own company, I might do that instead of sticking with this sort of unknown and what's going to happen in my job in this sector. I don't know. But yeah, again, reason why we could all benefit from maybe diving a little deeper into what that looks like.
Innovation Hub is something to keep your feelers out for. It's, we're working on a grant right now, spearheaded by OSU Cascades, and that should help to stimulate growth of resources here.
Brian, are the other venture funds other than the VVC funds still pretty active here? I'm just not plugged into that anymore,
No.
like Dina's
Gone.
thing. And okay, that's kind of what I thought.
Yeah, but it's also less important that a fund be here to get financing,
Okay.
right? Like, remember there was that, you had to like, if you got financing out of the Bay Area, it used to be that you had to move there. That's not the case anymore. No, I don't think, right? Partially because of all the remote dynamics and, but no, the funds are not active here. Cascade Seed Fund has one person here, but they're more active, I would say, in Portland and Seattle. So. And Seven Peaks is gone.
Mark has a question.
Hey guys, I like the presentation. I liked seeing about the fact that you guys track this cost to business. I'm curious if you have a metric that looks at the commercial industrialized space that you were mentioning against the housing costs, whether that be rent or mortgages or whatever, something like that.
Do you mean the cost of commercial real estate versus residential real estate is?
That and the metric of the availability of housing in relationship to availability of the commercial space.
No, I would say when the materials you read that are regional really do separate it. They'll talk about it completely separated. That's an interesting concept. So that's a foreign question to me, actually. Like the Compass report is a nice frequent report we probably all read, and it completely isolates each from the other.
Interesting. I do feel like there's some correlation there, but I wondered if maybe there was already a metric. Doesn't sound like it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the residential cost per square foot or per unit, they're certainly coming down, not precipitously, probably in a healthy way. And the same thing directionally is happening with the industrial space. So they probably are always going to move somewhat in relative tandem.
I would think it's one of the things that makes it more difficult though here is that housing costs that we have that have gone up so significantly over the past few years. And then at the same time, the need to only go in for remote work. I think that's an interesting coupling that occurs. And so I was just curious if there was a metric that tried to correlate that.
No. Sorry.
I imagine it's something we could back into just with existing data pretty easily. So yeah, we'll do some digging, Mark, and see what we come up with.
We might want to rethink our North Star metrics as well, just with all the changes that kind of have come about over, because they're not super reliable or relevant, I guess, from my perspective. They're losing relevance, let's put it that way. as things have just kind of changed, right? So that's why I think all these questions are kind of like, how many people are actually here working for companies here, or what's commercial versus residential? Those are all important questions, right?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Any more?
Thanks, guys,
For
everybody. Thank you.
All right. Cyrus.
Yeah, just to tee this up, so for folks, I think most folks have met Cyrus. He's our new business advocate. He's been here about a little over a month and a half now, really hit the ground running. Already has spoken to the Visit Bend Board and the Bend Central District Business Association about the transportation fee. Sent out newsletters, really feels like we're starting to get some more information out there ahead of time, which is great. So great work on that. And then is really taking on this project you mentioned earlier, Gary, around how do we track cost of doing business, whether that's upfront development or ongoing costs. So
Yeah, so we have heard from folks in BDAB and other people in the business community of really trying to generate a tool that could calculate or at least give us a ballpark of this holistic cost of doing business or of development. And working alongside Russ and his team of what they're looking at with these sample developments and SDC methodology more specifically, I think that we don't want to be duplicative. So we want to utilize that information and how it feeds into this calculation of what we're looking at. But we had a very introductory meeting last week with folks from COBA, CORE, the Chamber, EDCO, some BDAB members, et cetera, to really scope out what would be useful, what would be most beneficial to include in that calculation from the city side externally. So this is going to be an ongoing type of process. Right now, it's looking like we'll have two different subgroups that look at one that looks at upfront costs and then another that look at ongoing operational costs. And then once we have more information with each of those groups, kind of bring them together to give us that bigger picture. But just wanted to relay to this group that the process is ongoing and we'll probably have routine updates to BDAB on where things are looking throughout the process.
yeah, and I guess just to chime in, I think the big driver, and Gary, you brought it up and Brianna brought it up in the last meeting, is we've had a lot of discussions around fee increases or fee changes in the last 6-8 months. There's probably more coming. As I think you all know, there's kind of these permit fee increases at least planned for over the coming years. And there's not a whole lot of context around what that means as it relates to other price changes. So some of that work's being done right now on some specific projects around SDCs, thinking that can be a jumping off point to maybe tracking 3, 4, 5 kind of example type projects over the however long we want to do it. Really, as these discussions come up, you're not having a discussion around a transportation fee without context of other ongoing costs that have changed, whether that's utility rates, property taxes, levies, and the like.
Yeah, I think a point that COBA and the Chamber have been vocal about justifyingly is just how do you quantify time throughout these processes? And so we're looking at what could be measurable and how we can start to account for some of those things that could go into the calculation. Cool. I think that's all I have on that.
Great. Sounds good. So roundtable, future topics.
Yeah, and we have this on every agenda for the new folks. If there's burning issues out there or ideas on things you'd like to hear about in the future, at a future meeting, it's a good chance to bring them up, and we'll see if there's support from BDAB to book something on a future agenda. Is Tierney still on? Tierney actually sat down with Cyrus and I late in 2023 and had a request that we were going to bring forward, but
yeah, she's on here.
There she is.
Yep, I'm here. Hi.
You want to tee it up, Tierney? Happy to as well.
No, you tee it up and I'll add comments.
So Tierney as I mentioned, Tierney sat down with Cyrus and I late last year. Tierney owns a store downtown. Some changes to how we're managing or have managed parking have come up. You may have seen some headlines in various media outlets in the last few months around it. So one thing when Tierney asked, what's the deal? What's the long-term plan with parking? My feedback was this might be a good kind of thing to bring up with BDAB. It wouldn't have to be certainly a whole agenda item, but a lot of different opinions swirling around about what's going on with parking downtown, both in terms of downtown stakeholders, but also visitors to downtown. I have no doubt Visit Bend hears feedback on parking as well. So thought if there was an interest, it would not be hard for us to get our parking team in here to at least say kind of where we're at in their strategic plan and where things are going in the future, and solicit feedback from BDAB and maybe help guide staff in economic development around how we engage going forward.
Yeah, I'd be up for it. I think it's an interesting conversation, and I have heard some small business challenges associated with the parking downtown recently, so.
Yeah, it was particularly tough this year because there was just lots of bad headlines about parking downtown being a mess right during, Christmas shopping season. And, we had a lot of feedback from our customers or people couldn't even, it just, we want people to be able to come downtown and not worry about getting a ticket. And it's just becoming increasingly more complicated. There are several apps. The way that you could park here or there changes a lot. And there doesn't seem to be a dialogue between the people that actually use downtown every day and the people making the decisions. So I wanted to see how we could figure that out, because it really had a measurable effect on holiday shopping downtown.
Yeah, seems worthy of our time to at least have a conversation about.
All right, we'll book that in there. Any other ideas or feedback?
That was good.
This is really probably more of a radar issue than a topic we can take action on. And Ben, you're obviously well aware of, and that is power to the region is a viewable constraint. It's not one today, but if it does become one, it'll be a pretty hard one to overcome. So I just think we should pay attention to it. I mean, I've become aware of it on specific projects here, and it's caused by growth. It's caused by national security issues on where the transmission equipment is created and made, which cannot be some overseas countries. The draw of power in units that are now required today based on new rules or whatever is higher than it used to be. And we have a ton of cranes in Bend here building housing, which we all know is a huge challenge every day. So I don't think we need to get into it, but I just think we need to ask a question about it every so often and see if we need to address or be more aware of it, maybe take some action if we had some ability. So that's my only point.
Yeah, and that's certainly one. I mean, there's some acute kind of transmission issues in certain parts of town right now that we're working on, but yeah, I think that's something we could probably book for an update, maybe a couple of months as the utility companies kind of get their arms around where the problems are. And
Where does our power come from locally? Where's our nearest power plants?
Primarily the river, the Columbia River, right? And so I don't think that power is the constraint. Is there enough power in the river to generate, or water in the river to generate power? It's getting it here. And it's just taking a lot longer and if the construction of those pieces happens on kind of the guest schedule, the anticipated schedule, it'd probably be okay. But if it isn't, if it's a year or 2 or 3 year, then we have, I think, other issues. And if in some respects we here in Bend, because it's such a wonderful place to be, we can't control all the growth here. Plus we can't anyway. If it's going to come just because it's so attractive, that demand's going to happen. We can't control the demand, I guess is the point. So it's a huge issue, way above my pay grade. It's just one that worries me in a decade or so, maybe less than that. That's it.
yeah, may have to hold off a little bit on getting that on a BDAP agenda, but certainly something we could see if we can get an update on. It's a pretty tough issue. So to be clear, though, plenty of power that can get into the region. It's more how it moves around town. And Gary, I don't know if you've run into this on projects, but I have heard even at, the individual building scale, getting some of that more kind of technical equipment around power supply, even in a building, is tough to get your hands on right now, just from what I've heard from some of the big projects going up. So I think those lead times, whether it's a switch gear in a building or a transformer, they're all coming from the same few places, and it's tough to get some certainty around that.
And if we're gonna take that up, we should probably take up water.
Yeah, I mean, that,
It is timely though, given, US infrastructure and clean energy investments, like what does the state, what sightline do we have on state projects that are geared towards Central Oregon? To Don's point, are there federal monies coming through the state that they have projects already teed up? I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know that that's a BDAB conversation
Yeah.
necessarily.
this is where it gets tough when your audience is council, right? And you can certainly tee things up for council. Hey, this may be a legislative priority down the line. But yeah, your feedback kind of goes, you can direct staff and you all certainly can reach out to the business community, right? But then when you're providing policy input, this comes up every now and again. BDAB can't write a letter to the governor. They can write a letter to council asking them, write a letter to the governor, which may not be a bad thing in this case, right?
Yeah, certainly not saying it's not important. It's just, yeah, we got
A lot of priorities.
yeah,
I will say, I mean,
a lot to tackle.
these discussions with, other utility companies, not just power, there are other constraints, right? Areas that development can bump up into that aren't just city imposed, that also can inhibit growth, right? And sometimes it may just be making sure that's as visible as possible. I mean, our line or my line, meeting with anyone building a decently sized project lately has been, have you talked to Pacific Power yet, right? Make sure you're on their radar so they know you're coming as soon as possible. You can adjourn it, Gary, if you want. You're
Yeah.
that
Meeting adjourned.
That's a
Thank you.
Thanks all.